Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk, also NBC Sports Network, and he joins us now. Mike, what does the NFL do with Greg Hardy? Is it under the new proposal or the old proposal where he would be punished for domestic violence?
Well, Dan, a few weeks ago, a judge in Minnesota found that the NFL could not discipline Adrian Peterson under the new personal conduct policy for something that happened before it was put in place. So Hardy presumably will fall under that same protection. And before the personal conduct policy changed, the standard penalty for a domestic violence incident was a 2-game suspension. Now, first, the NFL has to conclude that he engaged in domestic violence. There was a preliminary finding by a judge that he had. The criminal charge was dismissed. The NFL actually filed a lawsuit yesterday in North Carolina to get access to the exhibits, the documents that were used in that trial last July. And then once the NFL has all the information, they make a decision. But if they decide he did something he shouldn't have done, I think at most it's a 2-game suspension, but as we've seen, the NFL will do whatever they want to do, and then it's up to the player to try to fight it if the player thinks the league went too far.
Why did the Cowboys only sign him for 1 year?
Well, because I think the player wanted 1 year to get back at the market. There's a specific clause in there the Cowboys can't use the franchise tag or the transition tag on him, so he'll be back on the market next year after assuming he reestablishes himself as a top pass rusher. Okay. And I think that's a way to manage the risk. There was risk for everybody, and I'm sure the Cowboys would have liked to have had the ability to keep him around if he has 17 sacks this year, and if he stays out of trouble, and if he's not suspended, and he becomes a Pro Bowler again. I think the player wanted that maximum opportunity to go back to the market and get the payday that he didn't get last year because of the franchise tag and isn't getting this year because of the off-field issues.
Okay, now, if I'm a Cowboy fan, I'm thinking the following. So we signed Greg Hardy, incentive-laden, and he can make upwards of, 11, 12, 13 million. Why couldn't we spend money on DeMarco Murray?
Hey, and that's a great point, Dan. Ultimately, DeMarco Murray's cap number for this year in Philadelphia is $5 million. That's less than 3.5% of the total cap space available to every NFL team. Tony Romo counts for nearly 20% of the Cowboys' total cap space. And I think it reflects how teams view these positions. There aren't many great pass rushers, and there definitely aren't enough to go around. There are more than enough guys who can move the chains at the NFL level as running backs, especially if you believe you have a great offensive line and a great passing game to complement him. This is a value judgment from the Cowboys on what the position is worth. That's why it would be shocking if they would make a play for Adrian Peterson. They think they can get it done with Darren McFadden and Joseph Randle, and anybody else they can throw $500,000 for 1 year of service at. And if a guy develops as the workhorse tailback and he wants more money elsewhere, thanks for your service. See you later. We'll find somebody else to plug in.
Yeah, that was what I said about a half hour ago, that Hardy does something that very few can do, where you're assuming that the running backs are interchangeable, and you really think that offensive line deserves a lot of credit for his success. The interesting rule changes that were suggested. Let's just start with the 9-point play by the Colts. Why the Colts offering this up?
Well, and here's how this typically works. The competition committee spends weeks meeting and talking, and they have their proposals that go to the owners. But any team has the power to make any proposals they want. There were 18 different proposals made by individual teams this year. So the Colts decide, hey, we think people should go for 2 more often. So how do you create an incentive to go for 2 more often? You give them the opportunity to get a third point on top of it by kicking a 50-yard field goal that would be worth 1 point. I mean, why not just make it a 3-point play in the first place? If you either go for 1 or you go for 3, I think the idea of throwing on a 50-yard field goal is a little bit goofy, but I like the fact that people are starting to warm up to the idea of encouraging teams, or at least finding ways to encourage teams to go for 2 instead of going for 1, because the 1-point play is boring, the 2-point play much more exciting.
What is going to be put into play? I know more replays coming. The question is it going to be pass interference is going to be under replay? What are we looking at?
Well, and there have been different proposals made by teams. Every penalty should be challengeable, according to the Lions, but they believe that's not going to go through. Bill Belichick believes that the coach should be allowed to challenge any mistake he sees. If there's indisputable visual evidence to overturn any mistake by the officials, the coach should be able to challenge it. He's been pushing that for a while. And you know what? There's some merit to that idea. If somebody screws up so badly that it's obvious, regardless of what it is, shouldn't that be something that could be fixed if the goal here is to get these calls right, and they've streamlined the process so it doesn't take quite as long as it took in the past to get these calls right. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just you ultimately are going to need 24 votes for any of these things, and I think a lot of the team proposals are going to have a hard time getting 24 votes because it's only one team that's saying, let's do this. You got to get 23 other teams behind it, and that's not easy to do.
Is Jameis Winston skipping the draft because he wants to? Is the league involved in this in any way?
I think the league wants him to be there, especially now they're taking the draft on the road. They're going to Chicago.
Yeah.
You got to bring the stars. The stars aren't showing up. Where's Jameis Winston? We came to see Jameis Winston, and he's not here. So even though people probably would show up to boo Jameis Winston, and that may be one of the reasons why he's not going, this becomes a tough sell for the NFL if all of a sudden all the players decide, no thanks, I'm not going to Chicago, to L.A., to Houston, to wherever else you're going to put on the draft. I'm just going to stay home.
Yeah, what if Mariota says, I'm not going?
And, he seems like the kind of guy who would genuinely not want all the attention. I don't want to go. I don't need to go to that. I don't want to go walk out on a stage. That's not why I do this. I could see him saying that.
But if Tampa says, we're taking you number one, and to represent our organization in this proud moment, we want you there, shaking the hand of the commissioner and letting people know we're behind you.
And that changes the analysis for Jameis Winston. And then he has to ask himself, do I want to come in the door the right way if I think this is important to the Buccaneers? Or does Jameis Winston say to the Buccaneers, if that's what you're looking for, then maybe I'm the wrong guy?
Thank you, Mike.
See you, buddy.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk.